Okay, well, people love these financial ones, so I'm going to do another one. What chance does the US have against China? And would a gold currency save America? There may be many pro-Ron Paulers out there who believe that if America didn't use fiat currency, if they had gold-backed currency, that America would have a chance. That if you scrapped all subsidised things, farm subsidies and all the other sort of cushy industries that have been subsidised in America, that, capitalism in its raw form would take effect, and with that combined with a gold-backed currency, you'd have a chance. That's just crap. Look, I'll put it like this. If China was using a gold-backed currency and the US was using a gold-backed currency and it was all on a par, it was all reasonably even, which, with gold-backed currencies you don't get these strange blooming real differentiations in exchange rates and stuff like that. That'd sort of clean a lot of that up. But you still wouldn't have a chance. My mum's been reading this book about Hong Kong in the early days, and look, they're employing people on near slave conditions in Hong Kong back in the 70s and stuff like that. These people weren't going to work to make a better life for themselves or their kids. They were going to work to bloody survive. I've worked with Vietnamese over here. I've also worked with Burmese refugees. And others of you who have worked with Vietnamese and Chinese and people of Asian descent would have seen this. I know of someone else who worked as a factory worker in a Japanese factory in Japan. And they told me the same thing that I've seen here while working with Vietnamese. That is, they can move like no one else. I've seen them pruning grapevines. I've seen them boning chickens. I've seen the Burmese on the end of a machine producing stuff, having to put, things into crates and stuff like that. When I watch those Vietnamese boning the chickens, God, below it, look, they can move that fast. You can barely think that quick, let alone move your wrist that quick. And quite simply, on the odd occasion where I have worked at the same speed a Vietnamese works at, I've had RSI within 10 minutes of moving at the pace that Vietnamese can move at. White man can just not move that quick. It's just as simple as that. And I'd hazard a guess and say black man can't either. And quite simply, these people, they'll work for $2 an hour, and you say, yeah, but in China $2 buys a lot more. And you're probably right. But the thing is, they can work for 12 hours a day at speeds that would give white man and probably black man RSI within 10 minutes. You just can't keep up with them. And the pure fact of the matter is, even with gold-backed currencies and all that sort of stuff, white man and probably black man just can't move the same speed. So either way, you don't have a hope in competing against them unless you use high automation, unless you're doing technology-based stuff, banking, other things aside from manufacturing, because there's no hope. And when push comes to shove, all products you buy are manufactured. And a lot of what people spend their money on is either energy-related products or manufactured products, and food products as well. But, there's no hope for manufacturing unless you've got some super-duper machine that you keep very silent about, unless you're using a very high-tech method and they aren't willing to put the money in investment-wise. And look, it's just, there's a couple of other things you've got to understand about the Chinese. That is, when you look back on their history, they've faced very, very hard conditions at times. You know, when they do get a good crop, then they get what they call the mouldy season, and they lose half of their rice to mould, you know, and stuff like that. It's either, you know, not enough food or they're in flood. You know, the weather is so hard there. And basically the Chinese people over, you know, a couple of thousand years of this, they're hardened up to all that. So they're a darn sight more used to hard times than white man is. You know, furthermore, I've seen things where they seem to be able to make things out of almost nothing at all. They could just get just a whole bunch of old cardboard and just crap that you and me just throw in the fire or chuck in the bin, you know, and in a very small space with very, very rough equipment covered in rust and crap, they make, you know, toilet rolls that come out looking just as good as ones made on professional equipment. They can make honest, real products. You know, the quality mightn't be $1 million quality, but they can make pretty decent products when you consider how rough their equipment is, how little amount of equipment they've got, how hard yakka it is. I mean, I've seen this one that was a paper pulper, and they had a bloke on a bicycle running it. I mean, here in the West you'd just use electric motor, but they had a bloke on a bicycle. They had steam generation for this, you know, paper pulping process. The boiler was just a big pile of rust, you know. But you look at all this stuff and you look at the conditions they're under, and you go, God, blimey, there's no way they can make any decent product. And then you saw the product that come out the other end, and you couldn't differentiate the difference between. It was very hard to differentiate anything between a Western-made one and their one. And, you know, the quality, it looked really quite good. And then you look at their workplace and you're just about in shock. I mean, this is part of what I've seen during lean management training that I've had to do at work. But, yeah, some of their factories are just jaw-droppers. And yet they're putting out, you know, you think over here we'd have a machine to pack toilet rolls into plastic, the plastic packaging, the 12-pack they come in. Over there, they're doing it by hand. You think we'd have them cut by big, you know, blades or something like that, all automated. They were sitting there with a bandsaw, pushing through a monster long roll through a bandsaw, which, as they cut them, slipped off the end down a piece of cardboard onto the ground, and they got this Chinese woman there stacking all these rolls in by hand and stacking them on a pallet, and then getting a little pallet jack and taking them out. And you look at all this stuff and go, you know, you couldn't make anything good with this equipment, but they do, and they can make something from nothing. And that's, you know, one of the big aspects where we've got to have all nice clean equipment to make you know, a decent gear. And people refuse to work with things that look like the lead's about to short out and electrocute them. And, you know, people wouldn't want to be near this boiler that I saw. But all the same, you know, the Chinese can make stuff happen from almost nothing, and from very, very crappy machinery. But yeah, you know, there's make no bones about it, they're going to take the world over. It's as simple as that.